There are moments in life that leave a permanent mark, not because of what was achieved, but because of what was left unfinished. Sometimes it is not the grand victories or milestones that we remember most vividly, but the quiet promises exchanged. Under a summer sky, whispered between friends who believed they had all the time in the world. This is a story about two childhood friends, people who once shared every dream, every secret, and every reckless laugh of their youth. They believed nothing could ever separate them, and to prove it, they made a promise. A promise that seemed small then, but held the weight of eternity in their young hearts. Life, however, has its own way of testing such bonds. The years passed, responsibilities piled up, and what was once unbreakable began to fade into memory. Yet, the promise remained unspoken, unfulfilled, and quietly haunting. Many of us know what that feels like. Maybe it was a promise to call, to visit, to write. Maybe it was a vow to always be there, no matter what. But somewhere along the way, life interfered and we let it slip. We thought there would be another day, another chance, till one day, there wasn't. This story is not just about broken promises. It's about the fragility of time. It's the depth of true friendship and the reminder that some words once spoken live inside us forever. It's about regret, yes, but also about understanding forgiveness and the bittersweet beauty of what remains when everything else is gone. Unspoken promises will take you on a journey back to the innocence of youth, through the storms of adulthood, and into the quiet reckoning of memory. It is a reminder that while not every promise can be kept, the love and meaning behind them often endure longer than we realize. The first time Daniel met Lucas, they were only 8 years old. It was the summer of 1985, in a small town where the streets smelled faintly of cut grass and every evening ended with the sound of cicadas. Daniel had just moved into the neighborhood with his parents, carrying a box of toy cars and books he wasn't ready to share. Lucas, the boy next door, walked right up to him on that first day, handed him a stick of bubble gum, and said, "You look like someone who needs a friend." From that moment, they were inseparable. Summers were spent building forts out of old cardboard, racing their bikes down the dirt road until their legs burned, and daring each other to jump into the river even when the water was cold enough to make their teeth chatter. They played catch in the backyard until the sun sank low and their mothers called them home for dinner. To them, the world was wide and endless, but their friendship was the center of it. Lucas was bold, quick to laugh, always the one to take the first leap off the rope swing. Daniel, more thoughtful and cautious, was the steady hand that pulled them back when things went too far. They balanced each other perfectly. One night, after sneaking out to lie on the roof of Lucas's garage, the two boys stared at the blanket of stars overhead. Lucas, with that fire in his eyes, said, "No matter what happens, let's promise something. When we grow up, we won't forget this." "We won't forget us," Daniel nodded. "We'll always be friends, no matter where we go." It was a childish vow made under the glow of the moon, but to them it felt sacred. They sealed it with a handshake, then swore they'd one day travel the world together. New York, Paris, maybe even the pyramids of Egypt. The promise hung in the air, sweet and simple, binding their hearts. Through middle school and high school, the bond only grew stronger. When Daniel struggled with math, Lucas stayed up late helping him. When Lucas's parents fought, he'd slip into Daniel's room and sleep on the floor just to feel safe. They celebrated each other's birthdays like they were national holidays. And when one succeeded, it felt like both of them had won. But underneath it all, the world was already shifting. Teachers spoke of futures, parents whispered about responsibility, and time kept moving forward. Still, Daniel and Lucas believed nothing could break them. After all, they had a promise by the time Daniel and Lucas entered college. Their lives had already begun drifting in different directions. Daniel, ever the careful planner, chose to study architecture at a university 2 hours away. Lucas, restless and eager to escape the small town, good enlisted in the military that there. Last summer together before parting ways was a strange mix of excitement and unspoken sadness. They spent long evenings sitting by the riverbank, tossing rocks into the water and pretending nothing was changing. Lucas joked about how he'd send Daniel postcards from every corner of the world, and Daniel teased him about not being able to read his messy handwriting. But when silence settled between them, the weight of the unknown pressed heavily in the air. On their final night before Lucas left, they stood again on the roof of the garage where their promise had been made years earlier. The stars seemed dimmer now, or perhaps it was simply that they were older, aware of how fragile everything could be. Lucas pulled a small silver keychain from his paqueta, simple ring with their initials carved into the metal. "Keep this, Lucas," said, pressing it into Daniel's palm. "When we finally meet in Paris, you'll give it back to me. That way we'll know the promise is real." Daniel clutched the keychain tightly. "Then don't you dare forget. You owe me a trip to the Eiffel Tower." They laughed, but their laughter was thinner than it used to be, stretched across the fear of goodbye. The months that followed were filled with letters, at first Lucas writing from training camps, Daniel scribbling back during late-night study sessions. They teased each other, shared small victories, and reminded themselves that their promise was alive. But slowly, as responsibilities mounted, the letters grew fewer. Emails replaced handwritten notes, then became sporadic messages. Soon, entire seasons passed without a word. Daniel told himself it was normal. People got busy, life got complicated. Still, every time he touched the keychain, he felt the echo of their vow. Years slipped by. Daniel graduated, started working in a small architectural firm, and built a life that looked stable on the outside. Yet a part of him always waited for a call, a postcard, a sudden knock at the door. Lucas, meanwhile, moved from base to base, a shadow on the edge of Daniel's life, appearing only in rare updates from mutual friends or a fleeting photograph on social media. Then came the reunion. 10 years after their last summer together, Daniel returned home for a town festival. He didn't expect to see Lucas. Their rumor had it he was stationed overseas. But as Daniel stood near the food stalls, he heard a familiar laugh cut through the noise. He turned, and there he was. Lucas looked older, sharper, with lines etched into his face and a weight in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. But his smile, his reckless, fearless smile, was the same. They embraced, the years melting away in an instant. Conversation flowed awkwardly at first, then more easily as they walked through the old streets, revisiting places that had once been theirs. Yet Daniel noticed something beneath Lucas's bravado, a distance, a heaviness he couldn't explain. That night, sitting on the hood of an old car, Daniel asked softly, "Do you ever think about our promise?" Lucas's eyes darkened, looked away, kicking at the dirt. All the time. But before Daniel could press further, Lucas changed the subject, cracking a joke, masking whatever truth lay behind his silence. And though they laughed again, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them, that the promise they once held so tightly was slipping further out of reach. The reunion with Lucas lingered in Daniel's mind for weeks. After that night at the festival, they promised to stay in touch again, to not let another decade slip away. For a short while, it seemed possible. They called occasionally, exchanged messages, even spoke of finally taking that trip to Paris, half in jest, half in hope. But soon the old pattern returned. Lucas's voice became harder to reach, his replies slower, his words briefer. Daniel told himself not to take it personally. After all, Lucas had chosen a life that was unpredictable, bound by orders and duties. Still, every silence felt heavier than the last. One winter evening, Daniel's phone rang. It was Lucas. His voice was rougher than usual, edged with fatigue. "Danny," he said, slipping back into the childhood nickname. "I don't know when I'll be home again. Things are complicated. But listen, remember the promise, Paris. Don't forget it. Promise me you one single quotes. T. Daniel, unsettled by the strange urgency in his friend's tone, answered, I won't forget. Just come back safe, okay? Lucas chuckled, but it was hollow. Safe isn't always an option. Hut, I'll try. That was the last time Daniel heard his voice. Weeks turned into months. Then came the news. Lucas had been reported missing during an overseas operation. Not confirmed, dead, just missing. The word itself was cruel, dangling between hope and despair, giving Daniel nothing solid to hold on to. Daniel felt the ground slip beneath him. He tried to contact the military, begged for updates, scoured news reports, but the answers were always the same: uncertain, unfinished, unresolved. He found himself clinging to the silver keychain, now worn and scratched, running his thumb over their initials until the grooves pressed into his skin. At night, he dreamed of their childhood, of bike races down dusty roads, of laughter echoing by the river, of Lucas standing beneath the stars on that garage roof. And always in the dream, Lucas would turn to him and say, "Don't forget our promise." Friends and family tried to console him. "You have to let go," they said. But Daniel couldn't. How do you let go of someone who might still be out there? Someone who once swore eternity under a summer sky? The years passed with that ache lodged in his chest. He built his career, climbed the professional ladder, even tried to form relationships. But every bond felt incomplete, as though a part of him was frozen in that unspoken waiting. The world moved forward, yet Daniel remained tethered to a promise that had never been fulfilled. On the 10th anniversary of Lucas's disappearance, Daniel traveled back to their hometown. He walked the familiar streets, visited the riverbank where they had once dared each other to jump, and climbed onto the roof of the old garage. Though wood creaked beneath him, but the stars were still there, brighter now against the night sky. Sitting alone, Daniel pulled out the keychain from his pocket. The metal was cold in his hand, heavier than he remembered. "You said you'd come back for this?" he whispered into the darkness. "You said we'd go together." His voice broke, the words scattering into the night like fragile glass. He stayed there until dawn, clutching the keychain as though it were Lucas's hand. The next morning, just as he was about to leave town, Daniel stopped by a small cafe near the main square. It was there that he noticed a corkboard by the counter, filled with old postcards pinned by travelers from all over the world. His eyes scanned them idly, till one caught his attention. It was faded. Edges frayed, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Messy, uneven, undeniably. "Lucas, start down E. If you ever see this, know I tried. I never forgot." LDANIEL's heart pounded. The postcard had no date, no return address, only a sketch of the Eiffel Tower on its front. For the first time in years, hope and grief collided inside him, leaving him breathless. The promise wasn't broken, after all. It was simply unfinished. Daniel carried the postcard with him everywhere. Folded carefully into his wallet, it became a constant reminder that Lucas had reached out. Somehow, somewhere, before vanishing completely. It wasn't closure, not even close, but it was something tangible, something more than silence. Years continued to roll forward. Daniel's career flourished. He designed buildings that reached toward the sky, yet every success felt incomplete. People saw him as accomplished, reliable, steady. But inside, there was always the echo of that unfinished story, the ghost of a promise whispered on a rooftop. In his 40s, Daniel returned to his hometown once more. His parents had passed away, and the house he grew up in stood empty, waiting to be sold. Sorting through boxes of old photographs and dusty yearbooks, he found pieces of his childhood scattered like fragments of another life. And they're tucked between two faded school notebooks. He found a photograph of himself and Lucas at age 13. Both were grinning wide, arms slung around each other's shoulders, as if they believed nothing could ever change. Daniel sat on the floor for hours, staring at that photo. A wave of emotion surged over him: grief, yes, but also gratitude. He realized he had been holding on to the pain of loss so tightly that he had forgotten the joy of what once was. Their friendship, their laughter, the countless days they shared, those weren't lost. They were his, always. That night, Daniel walked to the riverbank. The water still whispered against the rocks, just as it had when he and Lucas were boys. Sitting there, he pulled the keychain from his pocket. Its surface was dull now, its engraving worn down by decades of touch. "Lucas," he said softly, "I kept it, kept my promise, even if you couldn't." His voice trembled, but there was no bitterness, only tenderness. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the promise wasn't about Paris or the Eiffel Tower. Maybe it was just about not forgetting. And I never did. The stars reflected on the river's surface, shimmering like pieces of memory. For the first time, Daniel felt a sense of peace. The ache in his chest didn't vanish, but it softened. No longer sharp and consuming, in the months that followed, Daniel began to live differently. He reached out to old friends he had lost touch with, reconnected with family, and allowed himself to open up in ways he hadn't before. He spoke often of Lucas, not with sorrow, but with affection, sharing their adventures, their laughter, their reckless youth. People listened, and in their listening, Lucas lived on. On his 50th birthday, Daniel finally booked a flight to Paris. Alone, he stood beneath the Eiffel Tower, looking up at its iron lattice stretching into the sky. He held the keychain tightly, feeling both the weight of absence and the warmth of memory. "This was ours," he whispered. "And I'm here for both of us." He closed his eyes, imagining Lucas at his side, laughing, nudging him, pointing out details with that irrepressible energy. For a moment, it was as if the years melted away, and the promise, though never fully realized, found its place. Sometimes, Daniel thought, not every story needs a perfect ending. Some stories are beautiful precisely because they remain unfinished, because they remind us of what it means to care, to dream, to hold someone close in our hearts even when they're gone. And in that understanding, the unspoken promise finally became complete. Paris had been more than just a destination. It had been a dream, a symbol, and a vow. Standing beneath the Eiffel Tower, Daniel realized that what he was carrying wasn't merely grief. It was love unresolved, unspoken, but never forgotten. When he returned home, something inside him had shifted. He no longer thought of Lucas only with sorrow. Instead, he thought of the boy who had handed him a stick of gum on his very first day in town, who had dared him to jump into icy waters, who had laughed so hard that he doubled over with tears in his eyes. Those memories became a treasure rather than a burden. Daniel began teaching part-time at a local college, mentoring young architects. He would often share small stories about his youth, about promises, and the importance of keeping them. Not because they always can be kept, but because they shape who we are. Sometimes, he told his students, a promise is less about the outcome and more about the intention, the love behind the words. One evening, while walking past the riverbank where so many of his memories lived, Daniel stopped to watch a group of children skipping stones across the water. Their laughter echoed, bright and untamed, and he smiled. For a moment, he could almost see himself and Lucas among them. Two boys with scraped knees and endless dreams. He took the keychain from his pocket one last time. The engraving was almost gone now, worn away by years of holding on. Daniel kissed it gently, then tossed it into the river. The water caught it, swallowed it whole, carrying it somewhere unknown. It wasn't about letting go, it was about giving it back. To the river that had once carried their laughter, to the stars that had witnessed their vow, to the boyhood promise that had shaped him into the man he had become, Daniel whispered, "Thank you, Lucas, for everything." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, Daniel felt something he hadn't in years: freedom. Not freedom from the past, but freedom to carry it differently, not as a wound, but as a gift. He finally understood that some promises aren't meant to be fulfilled in the way we imagine. Some live on as reminders of love, loyalty, and the fragile beauty of time. They remind us that every moment with someone we care about is a promise in itself, an unspoken vow that lingers even when everything else fades. And so, Daniel walked away from the river with a lighter heart, knowing that Lucas was never truly gone. He was in the laughter of children in the night sky, in every stone that skipped across the water. The promise was never broken, it had simply transformed, finding its own way to live on. If this story touched you, pause for a moment and think about the promises in your own life. Not the grand ones carved into stone, but the quiet ones, the promise to call, to visit, to be there when it matters most. Sometimes we take them for granted, assuming there will always be more time, more chances. But as Daniel and Lucas's story shows us, life doesn't always give us the luxury of later. Maybe there's a friend you once shared everything with, someone who knew your secrets, your laughter, and your dreams. Maybe you haven't spoken in years, or maybe there's someone close to you now who is waiting for a word, a gesture, a reminder that they still matter. Don't wait. Reach out. Send the message, make the call, write the letter. Even the smallest effort can bridge years of silence. And if you're holding on to an unfulfilled promise, something left undone or unsaid, know this: the value of a promise isn't only in its completion, but in the love and intention that gave birth to it. Just as Daniel discovered, some promises live forever in memory, shaping who we are and reminding us of what matters most. We can't always control time or fate or distance, but we can choose to honor those we love by remembering them, by speaking their names, by carrying forward the kindness and joy they gave us. That too is a way of keeping a promise. So tonight, as you finish this story, I invite you to take action. Reconnect with someone you've drifted from. Share a memory. Keep a small vow. Or simply tell someone you love them. Don't let the promises that truly matter remain unspoken, because at the end of our lives, it's not the things we did perfectly that stay with us. The love we gave, the friendships we nurtured, and the promises we tried in our own imperfect way. To keep